January 13, 2012. The coast of Isola del Giglio, off the west of Italy. A calm winter evening, the sea almost flat, the kind of night nobody at sea is supposed to fear. A cruise ship the length of 3 football fields, 290 meters, 114,000 tons, 17 decks tall, is sailing close to shore so the passengers can see the lights of the island. On board are 4,229 people. Around 9:45 p.m., the hull scrapes a rock shelf just below the surface. A gash 53 meters long opens along the port side. Seawater floods the engine rooms. The lights go out, and a ship the size of a skyscraper laid on its side begins slowly to roll over. 32 people would not survive that night, but 4,000 others did, and the people who got them into the lifeboats, who carried them through corridors filling with water in the dark, were not the officers on the bridge. They were the waiters, the cooks, the cabin stewards, and the dishwashers. The 2,000 people who don't appear in any brochure, who live in a second ship hidden beneath the one the passengers paid for, down below the waterline, in a world the guests are never allowed to enter. Today, the largest cruise ships on the planet carry more than 7,600 passengers and nearly 2,350 crew. That's almost 10,000 human beings on a single hull, a floating city larger than most towns you've driven through. And roughly 2,000 of those people live, sleep, and work in a compressed world you never see, along a corridor so busy the crew named it after a highway. We're going to go down into that world, deck by deck, where they sleep, what they eat, how the ship keeps 2,000 hidden people alive at sea for 9 months without ever stopping, how they see a doctor, how they get paid, what happens when 2,000 strangers are locked together for most of a year. But the most important thing is at the end, because there is one deck, lower than all the others, that the passengers are never allowed to see, and it is not hidden to keep a secret. It's hidden because of a law of physics, and that same law is exactly why the Costa Concordia rolled over on a calm night. Watch to the end. That's where the answer is. Start with the scale of what has to be solved. A modern mega cruise ship is not a boat in any sense your instinct understands. Icon of the Seas, delivered in 2024, measures 365 meters from bow to stern. That's the length of 3.5 football fields laid end to end. She's as tall above the water as a 20-story building, and she carries a maximum of 600 passengers plus about 2,350 crew. Now hold that number in your head. 10,000 people. A town. And a town needs everything a town needs. Beds, meals, fresh water, electricity, sewage, laundry, medical care, security, garbage removal, a fire department. Except this town has no ground beneath it, no pipes running in from a city, no trucks arriving in the morning, no hospital to drive to, no police station down the road. Everything has to be generated on board, from seawater and diesel and nothing else. And it has to run 24 hours a day because a cruise ship almost never stops. Here's the part that surprises people. The passengers see maybe 60% of the ship. The pools, the theaters, the restaurants, the cabins with balconies. The other 40%, and almost everything below the waterline, belongs to the crew. 2,000 workers are compressed into a fraction of the space, out of sight, running the machine that the guests experience as a holiday. To make that work, the ship is really 2 cities stacked on top of each other. There is the city in the light, the one with the champagne and the water slides. And there is the city in the dark, directly beneath it, where the real work happens. The 2 cities almost never touch, and the border between them runs along a single corridor. Go down to deck 1. Or on some ships deck 0, and you find a passage that runs almost the entire length of the ship, bow to stern, in a straight line. On a 360-meter vessel, that's a corridor longer than 3 football fields, lit with hard fluorescent light, lined with pipes and doors, and the smell of industrial cleaning fluid. The crew call it the I-95, named after the interstate highway that runs up the entire east coast of the United States, the busiest road in America. And the name fits. Because at shift change, this corridor carries foot traffic like a rush-hour freeway. Hundreds of people in uniform, moving in both directions at once. Everything branches off the I-95. The crew mess, the provision lockers, the laundry, the stairwells down to the engine room, the offices, the crew shops, the training rooms, the medical center, the security post. If the passenger decks above are a resort, the I-95 is the loading dock, the service road, and the main street of the hidden city all at once. A single artery 2,000 people move through every single day. And it has its own culture. There are notices on the walls in a dozen languages. There's a rhythm to the traffic. The galley crew moving before dawn, the entertainment staff surfacing in the afternoon, the night cleaners appearing when the guests go to bed. There are unwritten rules about which side you walk on so the trolleys of food and linen can get through. Some crew go weeks barely seeing daylight, because their entire working life happens along this one corridor and the rooms that open off it. And the I-95 exists at the very bottom of the ship for a reason we'll come back to at the end. That position, the lowest, heaviest part of the hull, is not an accident. Remember that. Off the I-95 and the decks just above it are the crew cabins. And this is where the two cities diverge most sharply. A passenger suite on Icon of the Seas can run over 200 square meters across 2 floors, with a private balcony and a whirlpool. A crew cabin is closer to 12 square meters, smaller than a single parking space, and it's shared by 2 people who often have never met until the day the contract begins. Bunk beds, a narrow desk built into the wall, a small wet room bathroom you can touch both walls of at once. Limited storage, because there's nowhere to put anything else. Most crew cabins are deep inside the hull with no window at all, because a window is real estate, and real estate is sold to guests at a premium. So you can spend 9 months sleeping in a room where you cannot tell, without looking at a clock, whether it's noon or midnight, and your cabin mate is very likely from the other side of the planet. On a single large cruise ship, you'll find 60 to 80 nationalities in the crew.
Want to get mine? We're going to Esperance me.
All compressed into that same 12 square meters and that same corridor. It is one of the most densely international spaces on Earth. 2,000 people, dozens of languages, 1 narrow bunk each, stacked below the sea. There is a hierarchy written into the beds themselves. The newest crew, the assistant waiters, the cleaners, the galley hands, are 2 to a windowless cabin at the bottom. Move up in rank, and the cabin gets slightly bigger. Then you get it to yourself. Then, if you become a senior officer, you might finally get a cabin with a porthole, high enough to see the horizon. On a cruise ship, a window is not a luxury, it is a rank. And thousands of people spend most of a year earning the right to simply see the ocean they're sailing across. Feeding 10,000 people is a logistics operation that would strain a mid-sized city. A large cruise ship loads something on the order of $1 million of food and provisions before a single week-long voyage. Tens of thousands of eggs, tons of meat, tons of fresh fruit and vegetables, thousands of liters of milk, all craned aboard in a few hours through hatches near the I-95, while the previous week's passengers are still disembarking. On turnaround day, the hidden city works at a speed the guests never witness. An entire town's weekly groceries loaded, sorted, and stored below the waterline in the time it takes you to check out of your cabin. The crew have their own dining hall, the crew mess, and its defining feature is that it never really closes. It runs from before sunrise to long after midnight, because on a ship there is no single mealtime. There's always a shift starting and a shift ending. The food leans toward the crew's own home cuisines: rice and curry, Southeast Asian dishes, Eastern European stews, Latin American staples, such levels the guest restaurants would never serve. Because when you're 9 months from home in a windowless cabin, the taste of the food from your country is not a small thing. It's morale. It's the one part of the day that feels like home. The galley that feeds the guests, meanwhile, is an industrial operation running almost around the clock. Picture a professional kitchen the size of a supermarket, stainless steel from floor to ceiling, hundreds of cooks working in a heat that stays high no matter the weather outside. On a big ship, they may serve 30,000 meals or more in a single day. The dishwashing alone is a world of its own, a wall of steam and conveyor belts moving tens of thousands of plates, run by people who will wash dishes 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, for their entire contract, and whom no passenger will ever see. And there's a quiet class system in the food. Officers often have a separate mess with waiter service and better menus. The temperature difference between the crew galley and the guest galley, a few decks apart, tells you everything about the two-city design. The same ship, the same voyage, two completely different worlds separated by one stairwell. Now the invisible miracle. 10,000 people drinking, showering, flushing, and cooking. And almost none of that water comes from land. A large cruise ship makes most of its own fresh water out of seawater, producing well over 2 million liters a day. That's enough to fill an Olympic swimming pool roughly every single day, pulled from the ocean and purified on board, endlessly, while the ship is moving. It's done two ways. Evaporators boil seawater using waste heat from the engines and catch the pure steam, leaving the salt behind. And reverse osmosis units force seawater through membranes so fine they strain out the salt at the molecular level, pushing against pressure equivalent to a column of water hundreds of meters deep. Salt water goes in one end, drinking water comes out the other. If those systems fail, the countdown to a crisis is measured in days, because there is no reservoir out here, no backup pipeline. The sea is all around you, and not one drop of it is drinkable until the machines below the waterline make it so. Think about what that means for the crew who run it. The engineers deep in the hull are not just keeping the ship moving. They are, quite literally, manufacturing the water that 10,000 people will drink tomorrow out of the ocean, tonight, in a room you will never enter. The power to run all of this is staggering. The engines of a big cruise ship put out on the order of 80 megawatts. Enough electricity to light a city of tens of thousands of homes, all of it consumed by one hull moving through the water. Those engines burn something like 250 tons of fuel a day, and everything the guests never think about runs on that same power. The air, for one. Thousands of crew live in interior spaces with no windows, so every breath of air down there is pushed in through ducts by a ventilation system that never rests. Cooled, filtered, circulated, a mechanical lung for the hidden city. Running 24 hours a day so that 2,000 people in the belly of the ship can simply breathe. Then there's the waste, the part nobody wants to picture. 10,000 people produce an enormous volume of sewage and garbage every single day, and out at sea there is nowhere to send it. So the bottom of the ship holds a full treatment plant, processing the waste of a small town, plus a recycling and incineration operation that sorts and compacts and burns what it can. Somewhere below the waterline, right now, crew are running the sewage plant for 10,000 strangers on holiday above them. It is one of the least glamorous jobs on Earth, and the entire floating resort collapses into a health emergency within a day if it stops. And the laundry. An industrial plant washing tens of thousands of towels, sheets, tablecloths, and uniforms a day, in machines the size of small cars, in a heat that makes the crew galley feel cool. Every crisp white towel a guest drops on the pool deck comes back through that room, folded by hand, by someone working a 12-hour shift below the sea. Here's a system almost no passenger thinks about until they need it. 10,000 people is the population of a town, and towns have medical emergencies. Heart attacks, strokes, broken bones, appendicitis, births, and deaths. But this town is sometimes days from the nearest hospital, in the middle of an ocean, with no ambulance and no way to simply drive to help. So every large cruise ship carries its own medical center, low in the ship near the I-95, an emergency room in miniature. with doctors and nurses on call around the clock, a small intensive care setup, ventilators, a lab, an X-ray machine, a pharmacy, and a supply of blood. It is built to stabilize almost anything long enough to keep a patient alive until the ship reaches port or a helicopter can lift them off the deck in a winch rescue at sea. And this medical center serves both cities at once, the guests above and the 2,000 crew below. A crew member who falls ill 9 months into a contract, thousands of miles from home, is treated in that same small hospital in the belly of the ship. It is, for most of them, the only doctor they will see for the length of their contract. A floating clinic, tucked below the waterline, quietly holding the line between a bad day and a tragedy for 10,000 people. A town of 10,000 people also needs someone to keep order, because with that many strangers packed together, things happen. Theft, fights, intoxication, occasionally something far more serious. And once again, there is no police station to call. Help is not minutes away. It might be days. So the ship carries its own security force, and this surprises people. Its own small holding cell, sometimes informally called the brig, deep in the hull. It's a plain, secure room where someone can be detained until the ship reaches a port and can hand them to the authorities of whatever country that is. On a vessel that is legally its own little world under the flag it sails, the captain holds an authority closer to a mayor and a sheriff combined, and the security team below the waterline is the quiet machinery that backs it up. Most of the time, the job is small stuff. A guest who drank too much, a dispute that needs calming. But the brig exists for the same reason the morgue and the hospital exist. Because when you seal 10,000 people inside a steel city and push it out into the ocean, every single thing that can happen in a town of 10,000 will eventually happen here too, with no outside help coming. The hidden city has to be entirely self-sufficient, not just for comfort, but for everything human beings do. Here's what really shapes life in the hidden city. Not the space, but the time. A cruise ship crew contract typically runs 6 to 9 months. And across those months, the crew work every single day. There is no weekend. There is no full day off the way there is in a job on land. You sign for a season, and for that entire season you work 7 days a week. The shifts run 10 to 12 hours, often split across the day. A few hours before dawn, a few in the middle, a few at night, up to a legal maximum of about 301 hours in a month. To put that in perspective, a standard full-time job on land is around 160 hours a month. Crew routinely work nearly double that, with no day off for most of a year, in a room with no window, thousands of miles from anyone they love. International maritime law does draw one hard line. Under the Maritime Labor Convention, every crew member must get at least 10 hours of rest in every 24, a rule written not for comfort but for safety. Because an exhausted crew is a dangerous crew when something goes wrong at sea. But rest is not the same as freedom. You can be off the clock and still be trapped inside a 12-square-meter room in the middle of the ocean, with your family a text message and an ocean away, on a phone signal you pay dearly for. So why do they do it? Follow the money, and it makes sense. For a crew member from the Philippines, Indonesia, India, or parts of Eastern Europe or Latin America, a cruise contract can pay several times what the same work pays at home. Much of it in tips. Most of it saved, because there is almost nothing to spend it on out here. Meals are free. The cabin is free. There are no bills below the waterline. A steward can send home enough in 9 months to build a house, pay for a sibling's education, lift a whole family a rung up the ladder. The hidden city is filled with people making a hard, deliberate trade, the best years of their time, in a windowless room, in exchange for a future for the people they left behind. But you cannot run people like machines for 9 months and expect them to last. So the crew build a life anyway, and the ship builds spaces for it. Every large ship has crew-only areas the guests never glimpse. A crew bar where a beer costs $1 or $2 instead of the guest price. A crew mess that doubles as a social hall. crew parties and karaoke nights, a crew gym, sometimes a small crew pool, or a stretch of open deck at the very back of the ship, the one place many of them ever feel the sun and the wind. There are shipboard romances that turn into marriages, and shipboard friendships that outlast the contracts by decades. There are birthdays celebrated in the mess at 2 a.m. between shifts, with a cake the galley crew made in secret. There is a crossing the equator ceremony, a whole shipboard folklore passed down from contract to contract. Crew talk about the strange grief of the last week of a contract. The countdown you've waited months for suddenly feeling like leaving home again. Because the people down here have become a second family. The only people on Earth who understand what this life is. And then there's the homesickness that no bar can fix. Missing your child's first steps over a glitchy video call. Working through the holiday your whole family is celebrating without you. Watching, through a small screen, a life at home continuing without you in it, for 9 months, in a room with no window. A hidden city doesn't just work below the waterline. It celebrates, it falls in love, it grieves, and it endures down there, where you'll never see it. And now the part I promised you. Because there is one more space, lower and quieter than the crew bar and the mess and the brig, that almost no passenger will ever know is on board. Every large cruise ship carries a morgue. A small, refrigerated room, usually down near the bottom of the hull, built to hold several bodies. Because when you put 10,000 people to sea, some of them, statistically, will not step off alive. Most cruise passengers are older. Hearts fail. And when it happens, it is the crew, quietly, at night, through the I-95, while the guests are asleep above, who carry that reality to the one cold room at the bottom of the ship. The passengers wake up, go to breakfast, and never know that during the night, the hidden city did the one job the holiday can never be allowed to see. That's the truth of the hidden city. It doesn't only cook your dinner and change your towels. It treats the sick, keeps the peace, makes the water, breathes the air into its own lungs, and absorbs everything the holiday can't be allowed to witness. And it keeps all of it down below, out of sight, along a corridor named after a highway. But it raises the real question, the one from the very start. Why is all of this at the very bottom? Why is the crew city, the morgue, the hospital, the engines, the I-95, deliberately packed into the lowest, darkest, most claustrophobic part of the whole vessel? Why not put 2,000 workers up in the light? The answer is the same reason the Costa Concordia rolled over. Here's what really happens. A ship this size is, in the simplest terms, a floating object. And whether a floating object stays upright or rolls over comes down to one thing, where its weight sits. If the heavy mass is high up, the ship is top-heavy and unstable, and a small push can tip it past the point of return. If the heavy mass is low, near the keel, the ship behaves like a weighted buoy. Push it over, and it wants to swing back upright. Engineers have a precise term for this, the metacentric height. It's the distance between the ship's center of gravity and a point called the metacenter. And as long as the center of gravity stays low enough, the ship is self-righting. Every time the hull leans, buoyancy generates a force that pushes it back. That's the invisible hand that keeps a 20-story building of steel from flipping the first time a wave hits it broadside. So the designers do something deliberate. They take the heaviest, densest parts of the ship, the engines, the fuel, the fresh water tanks, the machinery, the stores, and they pack it all as low as possible, below the waterline. And down in that same low band of the ship, they put the crew and everything that serves them. The cabins, the I-95, the mess, the hospital. The hidden city isn't buried down there to keep it secret. It's buried down there because that lowest region of the ship has to be dense and heavy, and its weight is part of what holds the whole vessel upright. The people who live below the waterline are living inside the ship's ballast. They are, in the most literal engineering sense, part of what keeps 10,000 people from capsizing. That's the whole answer to the question from the start. The most important deck is the one you never see, Because it's the one keeping you level. And the Costa Concordia is the proof. When she tore that 53-meter gash and the sea flooded her engine rooms, water rushed into the lowest compartments, but unevenly, filling one side. The careful balance of weight that the whole design depended on was destroyed in minutes. Her center of gravity shifted. The righting force that should have pushed her back upright was overwhelmed, and on a flat, calm sea, with no storm and no wave, a ship the size of a skyscraper rolled onto her side, not because the ocean was violent, because the weight below the waterline stopped doing its silent job. The same physics that hides the crew is the physics that keeps everyone alive, and when it failed for everyone at once. We tend to think a cruise ship is the pools, and the glass elevators, and the buffet that never ends. But none of that is what keeps you alive out there. What keeps you alive is the weight underneath you. The engines, the tanks, the machinery, and the 2,000 people living in windowless rooms along a corridor you'll never walk down. They make your water out of the sea. They breathe the air into the ship. They treat you when you're sick, keep order when things go wrong, and carry away in the night the things you're never meant to see. And by simply living down there, in the densest, lowest part of the hull, they help hold the whole ship upright. The holiday floats on top of their labor, and it also floats on top of their weight. And both of those things are true at the same time. That's the strange bargain of every giant machine humans build. To carry 10,000 people across an ocean in comfort, someone has to live below the waterline for 9 months and hold the whole thing steady. The bigger the ship gets, the larger that hidden city has to be, and the further out of sight we push it. It has worked that way since the first great ocean liners over a century ago, and it works that way tonight, on dozens of ships crossing dark water while their passengers sleep. The next time you're standing on the top deck watching the horizon, remember that the most important part of the ship is the part directly beneath your feet. The part you'll never be allowed to see, filled with people whose names you'll never learn, holding your entire holiday level on the sea. Subscribe if you want to see more of what's really hiding inside the machines we trust our lives to.